G'day there. Finding a great composition doesn't come easy to everyone all of the time. There's a bunch of composition tip videos out there. In fact, I've done one myself. I'll link it up here. The issue with composition tip videos is they only work if you've already got a pretty good scene in front of you. You can use these tips to adjust or tweak your composition to improve it. But how do you find a decent composition or scene to begin with? This week, I'm going to share a few things you can do to help train your eye to see better compositions when you're out in the field. This video is sponsored by Squarespace, so if you need a website, a domain, or an online store, make your next move with Squarespace and use the discount code Marr. From my experience as a photographer and a workshop leader, if you're struggling with finding a good composition, it often helps to take a step back and look at how you're observing a location. If your plan is just to wander around and wait for the composition to just appear in front of you, there's a good chance you'll finish the trip disappointed because you just haven't taken a good photo. This approach only works if the composition is obvious in those easy to shoot locations. But not every landscape is easy to capture. So I'm going to give you 3 practical things you can do when you're next out in the field that'll help you find better compositions and take better images. When I'm exploring a location, I'm looking at the features of the landscape that I potentially want to include in an image. And to do that, I'm looking at both structure and attributes. I'm doing more than just finding elements in a scene like a tree or a rock and then trying to make an image. I'm thinking about how an element could add to the structure of the image, or if there's an attribute of the element that I think could add interest to the photo. The structure of an image is how the elements are laid out and forms the backbone of the composition. An element can add structure to an image by creating balance or symmetry within the photo, or provide a line that guides the eye, or a frame for the rest of the scene. But I may decide to include an element because of a particular attribute it has, like the texture or rich colours of a rock, or the fascinating patterns created by moving water, or the appealing shape of a tree. It's the attributes of objects that often provide detail and add interest to an image. Sometimes an element is included in a photo because it provides both structure as well as having attributes that are interesting. In this image taken at Kalbarri, I wanted to capture the pattern of the water cascading over the reef. This alone is an engaging attribute of the water that creates an interesting foreground. But I positioned the camera so the pattern of the water creates leading lines from the bottom of the frame. Plus the arc of the cascading water provides symmetry and balance to the image. The moving water is included in the composition because it provides both structure, and the attribute of the pattern it makes is a feature. Sometimes pulling an entire composition together can be complex and challenging. And a great strategy with any complex problem is to break things into smaller parts. So when it comes to composition, simply start by taking photos isolating individual elements of the landscape. This has been such a useful technique, not just for me, but I found it very helpful for participants in my workshops. Rather than photographing an entire scene, it's much easier to start taking photos of elements on their own. Plus, there's so many other benefits. For starters, it gets you using your camera straight away and allows you to see how a 3D object in the landscape translates as it's captured in a 2D photo. This can help as you start to visualize a potential image. I'd recommend not mounting the camera to a tripod for this stage. Just hand hold your camera so it's easier for you to move around and you're more agile. Focusing on just one object means that you're not distracted by what's happening in the rest of the scene. Don't just take one photo, experiment a bit changing the angle of the camera, observing how the light interacts with the surface of the object. Relating back to the previous point I mentioned, this approach is a great way of working out how an element may add structure to your final image, or whether you'll feature an attribute of the element like its texture or colour. Once you've grabbed a handful of shots, you can move on to the next element. Hopefully what comes out of this is you'll have a better awareness of what a location has to offer, and you'll know how you want to capture some of the features in the landscape. But how do you bring all of this together? Well, I'm going to share that next, but first I want to thank Squarespace for sponsoring this video. If you're like me, you want to spend as much time as possible getting out and shooting landscape images. The last thing you want to do is spend hours setting up and maintaining a website. And for me, that's where Squarespace really shines. It's very easy to set up a website with Squarespace. I had it done in no time. First, you select from one of their gorgeous templates, some of which have been designed specifically with photographers in mind, and then you just start creating pages. Each time you create a page, you can choose from one of their suggested layouts and then customize things from there. This speeds up the process. You can drag and drop your content to where you want it. No need for any code. It's very, very simple. And I recently added an online store that integrates with the rest of the website and with payment gateways. Other than updating content, I barely spend any time on my website, as Squarespace handles everything from hosting through to managing all the platform updates. So I can spend more time getting out and taking more landscape images. Head over to squarespace.com for your free trial. That'll give you heaps of time to set up your website. And then when you're ready to launch, make sure you go to squarespace.com/Andrew Marr to get 10% off your first purchase. In around 15 to 30 minutes of scouting an area, you'll hopefully find, say, half a dozen different elements within a landscape. Now the challenge is to bring this together in an image. As you explore the location, even if you're not taking photos of these elements, you'll naturally be making a mental note of the features you find interesting. I like to sometimes think of this part of the process as creating a mood board of the location, made up of the elements and their attributes that have caught your eye. Of course, you don't have to keep all of this inside your head. You can actually use an app on your phone to create a mood board, or you can use the camera roll on your phone to keep a record. This would be particularly helpful if you're exploring a location that you plan to come back to. Some of the elements you've discovered might become the main subject in an image. Other elements might be included to support the story you're capturing. The idea is to not include all of the elements you find in the one image. In fact, keeping it to 1, 2, or maybe 3 elements is a great way of keeping your composition simple. Consider elements that complement each other, like the details in rocks that have weathered over time against the soft flow of the water, providing contrasting textures as well as contrasting colours. If you've watched some of my photography adventure videos on the channel, you might have noticed that I do this sort of thing when I go out to a location. I take footage of elements that I find in the landscape. While the purpose is to capture B-roll for the video I'm making, I find that this process is helpful to identify what I find interesting in a location, and I start to gain an idea about what I want to include in an image. When I was up in the Karijini National Park last year, I was looking to compose a scene that represented the Pilbara landscape. The elements that represent that scene for me were the cool blue-green colours of the spinifex against the warm reds of the earth. A common tree in the region is the Pilbara ghost gum, which has this striking white bark on the trunk and branches. So I was looking for a location where there was a group of these ghost gums with some spinifex in the foreground. The ghost gums also provide a structure to the photo as I've positioned them in the centre. These are the primary elements that I use to compose this image. So there you have it. Look for attributes as well as structure. Take photos isolating elements within the landscape and try and piece together a mental mood board for the location. Now, you don't have to try and implement all of these ideas all of the time. Simply pick the strategies you think might help you find a better composition depending on your location. While these ideas are handy for those just getting into landscape photography, they can also be helpful for more experienced photographers who are looking for a composition in a new location they're not familiar with. I hope you found this helpful. Please help me out by hitting the like button so more people get to see this video. If you want to learn more about observational skills and how it can help with composition, take a look at this video up here, or you can check out this video that YouTube has recommended for you. Thanks very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.